What's wrong, little girl?
They took my mama! They took my mama!
When a 6-year-old girl ran into the most dangerous restaurant in Los Angeles, crying that men had taken her mother, everyone froze, because the man she grabbed onto was Daemon Choi, a Korean mafia boss who hadn't shown mercy in 20 years. The Jade Lotus restaurant operated on one rule: nothing interrupts Daemon's business meetings. His reputation was built on ice-cold decisions and zero emotion. Grown criminals crossed the street to avoid him. His own men feared disappointing him more than they feared death. But when little Lily Clarke burst through those doors, dress covered in dirt, clutching a torn photograph, sobbing that nobody would help her, something impossible happened. Daemon saw his own sister's face in hers, the sister who was kidnapped 20 years ago, the sister he failed to save, the guilt that turned him into a monster. His enforcer moved to remove the child. The entire restaurant held its breath, waiting for Daemon to order her thrown out, or worse. This was a man who'd built an empire by believing sentiment was weakness. But here's where it gets shocking. Daemon stood up. He knelt down to this terrified little girl, and he said 3 words that would change 3 lives forever.
Show me
where. What Daemon didn't know? Lily's mother wasn't just any victim. She was a social worker who'd been secretly documenting one of the city's most brutal trafficking rings, an operation run by Daemon's most dangerous rival. She'd collected evidence that could bring down an entire criminal empire, and now they had her. Daemon faced an impossible choice: ignore this child's plea and maintain the cold reputation that kept him alive, or break every rule he'd ever lived by to save a woman he'd never met, knowing it would spark a war that could destroy everything he'd built. His advisors warned him, "This will cost you your empire." But as Daemon looked into Lily's desperate eyes, he realized something terrifying. For 20 years, he'd been running from the guilt of failing his sister. Now, a 6-year-old stranger was offering him something he thought was impossible: a second chance at redemption. But redemption comes with a price. The trafficking ring had 12 women imprisoned in a warehouse protected by armed guards. The FBI had no idea where to look. Time was running out. And Daemon's enemy, a man as ruthless as him but without any limits, would rather kill every hostage than let them go. One wrong move, and Lily loses her mother forever. One moment of hesitation, and Daemon proves what he's always feared, that he really is the monster everyone thinks he is. What Daemon did next didn't just shock the entire city. It proved that sometimes the smallest act of courage from a child can rescue the darkest soul from itself. This is the story of how a little girl's tears brought a mafia boss to his knees, and how one desperate plea changed everything. If you believe monsters like Jackson Vale and his Iron Dragon's trafficking ring deserve to be exposed and stopped, hit that subscribe button right now. Only people who turn a blind eye to evil won't. If you stand against those who prey on innocent women and terrorize children, let me know by commenting "No mercy for traffickers" below. Let's build a community that doesn't look away from injustice. The Jade Lotus restaurant hummed with the quiet efficiency of controlled power. Crystal chandeliers cast amber light over white tablecloths, and the scent of expensive whiskey mingled with soy and sesame oil. At the corner table, the one positioned so its occupant could see every entrance and exit, Daemon Choi sat like a king holding court. His lieutenants spoke in hushed tones about shipment routes and territory disputes. Tobias, his head enforcer, leaned in to discuss a debt collection that had gone sideways. June, his tech specialist, scrolled through encrypted messages on a tablet. Marcus, his consigliere, raised concerns about the Iron Dragon's recent movements into their territory. Daemon listened to it all with the detached focus of a man who had built an empire on calculated decisions and zero sentiment. At 38, he had transformed himself from a traumatized teenager into the most feared Korean-American boss in Los Angeles. The dragon tattoo coiling up his neck served as a warning, beautiful and deadly. He lifted his glass of whiskey, savoring the burn, when the front doors slammed open. The sound was so out of place that every conversation in the restaurant died instantly. Daemon's hand didn't move toward his weapon. He didn't need to. Every man at his table was already tensing, ready to handle whatever foolish soul had just violated the sanctity of his meeting. But when heads turned toward the entrance, confusion rippled through the room. It was a child. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, stood in the doorway, chest heaving as if she'd been running for miles. Her blue dress was stained with dirt and what might have been blood. Her light brown hair hung in tangled waves around a face streaked with tears. In her small hands, she clutched a photograph so tightly it was creased and torn at the edges. For a moment, nobody moved. Then she stumbled forward, her desperate eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Daemon's table. Something in her expression, raw terror mixed with the thinnest thread of hope, made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in 20 years. "Sir," Tobias murmured, half rising from his seat. "I'll handle this." Daemon raised one hand, barely a gesture, but it stopped Tobias cold. The little girl was running now, weaving between tables as startled patrons pulled back. She ignored the servers who tried to intercept her, slipped past a hostess reaching out, and made a direct line for Daemon's table. Her sobs echoed in the silence, broken, desperate sounds that shouldn't exist in a place like this. She reached him and grabbed onto his jacket with trembling fingers, the photograph crumpling between them. Up close, Daemon could see the terror in her wide eyes, the way her whole body shook, the dirt under her fingernails. "Please, mister," she gasped between sobs. "They took my mama. A white van. I saw it. I tried to stop them, but I couldn't, and nobody will help me, and—" Her words tumbled over each other, barely coherent through her tears. "Please, she's dying. I know she is." Daemon stared down at her, and for just a moment, he wasn't in the Jade Lotus anymore. He was 18 again, watching his little sister Mina being dragged into a van while he lay bleeding on the pavement, too broken to save her. He saw Mina's face in this child's desperate expression, the same terror, the same helpless fear. His men were watching him, waiting for orders. The entire restaurant held its breath. Daemon Choi didn't show weakness. He didn't get involved in civilian problems. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, unreachable, unmoved by sentiment. But as he looked into Lily Clarke's eyes, though he didn't know her name yet, something he'd thought was dead stirred in his chest. He stood slowly, his movement causing his lieutenants to exchange shocked glances. The little girl stumbled back slightly, suddenly aware that the man towering over her was dangerous. But Daemon knelt down to her level, his voice quiet but steady. "Show me where." The words felt foreign on his tongue. They contradicted every instinct that had kept him alive and powerful. But as Lily's expression transformed from despair to desperate hope, Daemon knew there was no going back. He had just broken his most important rule: never let anyone close enough to matter. And somewhere deep in his carefully guarded heart, the walls were already beginning to crack. If you can't stand predators like the Iron Dragons who think they're untouchable, smash that like button. Comment, "Protect the innocent" if you believe no child should ever watch their mother being taken. Traffickers and their enablers scroll past, but we know you're not one of them. Subscribe if you stand with those fighting for justice. Daemon's black Mercedes cut through the Los Angeles night like a blade. In the back seat, Lily had finally stopped crying, though her small body still trembled against Mrs. Song's side. The elderly woman, his driver, and one of the few people Daemon trusted completely, stroked the child's hair with surprising gentleness for someone who had once been one of Seoul's most efficient enforcers. "Take her to the safe house," Daemon said, his voice low. "Stay with her. I'll call when I know more." Mrs. Song nodded, understanding in her dark eyes. She had been there 20 years ago when Minna disappeared. She knew exactly what this was costing him. Lily's apartment building in Echo Park was a modest 3-story structure with peeling paint and a broken security gate. Daemon moved through the shadows with practiced ease, Tobias flanking him while June worked his phone, already pulling up building schematics and camera feeds. The door to apartment 2B hung partially open, the frame splintered where someone had kicked it in. Daemon's hand moved to the gun at his waist as he pushed inside. The living room looked like a hurricane had torn through it. An overturned coffee table lay surrounded by scattered papers and broken picture frames. A child's drawing, stick figures labeled Me and Mama, lay crumpled near the wall. The couch cushions had been thrown aside, and a lamp lay shattered on the floor. But it was the blood that made Daemon's jaw clench. Not much, just a smear on the hardwood near the kitchen entrance, but enough to confirm violence had happened here. "Boss?" Tobias called from the bedroom. "You need to see this." Daemon moved through the apartment, cataloging every detail. In the bedroom, Audrey's laptop sat on a cluttered desk, miraculously untouched by whoever had ransacked the place. Beside it lay stacks of manila folders, their contents spilling across the surface. He opened the first folder and felt ice slide down his spine. Missing women, dozens of them. Each file contained photographs, dates, last known locations. Some faces he recognized from news reports, cases that had gone cold, women the police had stopped looking for. Audrey Clarke had documented everything with meticulous detail. Trafficking routes marked on maps, financial transactions, shell company names, and photographs. Lots of photographs. Marcus Brent and Cody Shaw, Vale's top enforcers, caught on camera outside a warehouse. Jackson Vale himself, shaking hands with a known trafficker. The Iron Dragon's entire operation, laid bare by a social worker who had apparently decided to be a one-woman investigation team. "She was building a case," Daemon murmured, flipping through the evidence. "Against Vale." His phone buzzed. June's voice came through sharp and urgent. "Boss, I pulled the street cameras from the last hour. White van, Iron Dragon's plates, parked outside her building at 6:47 p.m. 2 males exited, entered the building. Emerged 12 minutes later carrying a woman matching the description, blonde, early 30s. She was conscious but restrained." Daemon's grip on the phone tightened. "Where did they go?" "Lost them in traffic near Vernon. But boss..." June hesitated. "This is Vale's operation. If we move against him for this, I know what it means." Daemon cut him off. The words came out cold, final. "Mobilize everyone. I want every informant, every contact, every favor we're owed called in. Find that warehouse." He ended the call and stood in the wreckage of Audrey Clarke's life, surrounded by evidence of her courage and her foolishness. She had gone after the Iron Dragons alone, armed with nothing but documentation and determination. And now she was paying the price. Daemon thought of Lily's terrified face, her desperate plea. He thought of Minna and how he'd been too late to save her, how that failure had hollowed him out and turned him into something cold and calculating. But maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. 2 hours later, Daemon sat in his safe house as Lily curled up on the couch, wrapped in one of Mrs. Song's blankets. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed but dry now, fixed on his face with desperate hope. "Are you going to find her?" Lily whispered. Daemon knelt before her, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made even hardened criminals flinch. But he softened it for this child who had unknowingly cracked open his carefully sealed heart. "I will bring your mama home," he said, and the words felt like both a promise and a prayer. "I don't break my promises." Lily's small hand reached out and grabbed his, squeezing with surprising strength. "Thank you, mister." Daemon Choi had just declared war on Jackson Vale and the Iron Dragons, and for the first time in 20 years, he was fighting for something more than power or territory. He was fighting for redemption. The next 18 hours became a carefully orchestrated symphony of pressure and power. Daemon's network stretched across Los Angeles like invisible threads, and he pulled every single one. June worked his computers until his eyes burned, tracking financial transactions and communication patterns. Tobias leaned on street-level dealers and runners, extracting information with methods that didn't require asking twice. Word spread through the underground like wildfire. Daemon Choi was hunting, and anyone with information about the Iron Dragon's operations had a choice: cooperate or become irrelevant. Marcus found Daemon in his office at 3 a.m, surrounded by maps and surveillance photos. The consigliere's weathered face was tight with concern. "You understand what this means," Marcus said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Going after Vale's people for a civilian? The other families will see it as weakness. Or worse, as the opening move in a territory grab." Daemon didn't look up from the map spread across his desk. "Then let them see it however they want. This could start a war." "Then there'll be a war." Daemon's voice was ice. "Vale took an innocent woman who was documenting his trafficking ring. He terrorized a child. If that's the kind of operation he's running, he needs to be stopped." Marcus studied his boss for a long moment. They'd worked together for 12 years, and he'd never seen this particular look in Daemon's eyes, something almost desperate beneath the cold calculation. "This is about your sister," Marcus said quietly. Daemon's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "Get me that location." The break came at midnight in a parking garage downtown. Daemon stood in the shadows as a nervous man in a cheap suit approached. Leo Chen, a low-level operator in Vale's organization who had made the mistake of borrowing money from Daemon's people 2 years ago. "I shouldn't be here," Leo stammered, glancing over his shoulder. "If Vale finds out—" "Vale won't find out," Daemon said, stepping into the dim light. "Unless you give me a reason to tell him. Where are they holding the women?" Leo's face went pale. "I don't know anything about—" Tobias moved forward, but Daemon raised a hand. "Leo, you have a daughter, don't you? 8 years old, goes to St. Mary's Elementary?" The blood drained from Leo's face. "Please, don't—" "I'm not threatening your daughter," Daemon said, his voice softer but somehow more frightening. "I'm reminding you that some of us still remember what it means to protect children. The woman Vale took has a 6-year-old girl who watched it happen. Help me fix this, and your debt is cleared. All of it." Leo's hands shook as he pulled out his phone, showing Daemon a photo of an industrial building. "Abandoned meatpacking facility in Vernon. Warehouse 7. Vale moves the women through there before shipping them out. But boss, security is tight. At least a dozen men, maybe more." Daemon memorized every detail of the image. "You were never here." Leo disappeared into the night, and Daemon turned to Tobias. "Assemble the team. 4 men, our best. We move at dawn." Before the operation, Daemon found himself drawn back to the safe house. Mrs. Song let him in with a knowing look, pointing toward the living room where Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crayons and paper. The girl looked up as he entered, her face brightening. "Mr. Daemon!" He'd never told her his name, but Mrs. Song must have. Daemon knelt beside her, noting the picture she'd been working on. A woman with yellow hair and a bright smile, drawn in the simple, hopeful strokes of a child's hand. "That's my mama," Lily said, holding up the picture. "I made it so you remember what she looks like, when you find her." Something cracked in Daemon's chest, not painfully, but like ice breaking to let warmth through. He took the picture with careful hands, studying the crayon portrait of Audrey Clarke through her daughter's eyes. "Lily," he heard himself say. "I had a sister once. Her name was Minna. She was taken from me when I was young. And I couldn't save her." Lily's eyes went wide. "What happened to her?" "I don't know. I never found her." The words tasted like ash, but also like truth he'd needed to speak for 15 years. "But I'm going to find your mama. I promise you that." Lily suddenly threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with the fierce trust that only children possess. "You're gonna save my mama. I know it," she whispered against his shoulder. "Mina would want you to." Daemon held the small, fragile body carefully, feeling the weight of 2 promises, one made 20 years too late, and one he'd move heaven and earth to keep. When he stood to leave, he folded Lily's drawing and placed it carefully in his jacket pocket, right over his heart. If you believe evil men like Jackson Vale and his trafficking empire deserve to face the full weight of justice, drop a like right now. Comment, "Evil never wins," if you're on the side of those who protect the voiceless and fight for what's right. The facility loomed against the pre-dawn darkness like a monument to decay. Daemon studied it through night vision binoculars. 3 stories of corrugated metal and broken windows, surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing. Perfect for hiding things you didn't want found. At 2:47 a.m., he gave the signal. His team moved like shadows. Tobias and 3 others, each chosen for their skill and discretion. They'd done this kind of work before, but never for reasons like this. Usually it was about territory, about money, about power. Tonight felt different. The first guard went down silently, Tobias's hand over his mouth before he could shout. The second never even saw them coming. Daemon moved through the darkness with the practiced efficiency of a predator, his suppressed weapon an extension of his body. Each guard they encountered was neutralized quickly, professionally, without hesitation. The building's interior was a maze of machinery and shipping containers, the air thick with the smell of rust and old blood. Daemon's jaw tightened as they moved deeper, following the faint sound of voices echoing from somewhere below. They found the stairs leading to a basement level. 2 more guards stood watch outside a reinforced door. Daemon took the first one himself, a quick strike to the throat, then silence. Tobias handled the second with equal efficiency. The door opened onto a nightmare. The room was barely lit by a single flickering bulb, revealing a space that had once been a refrigeration unit. 12 women sat huddled against the walls, most with their hands zip-tied, all bearing marks of violence. Their eyes went wide with terror as Daemon and his team entered. More men with guns couldn't mean anything good. "We're not here to hurt you," Daemon said, his voice low but carrying. "We're getting you out." Then he saw her. Lily Clarke sat in the far corner, her blonde hair matted with blood, her face swollen and bruised. But her eyes, fierce, intelligent, still fighting, met his with a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. Daemon crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling out his knife to cut her restraints. She flinched at first, then held still as the zip ties fell away. "Lily?" she whispered, the single word cracking with fear and love. Daemon nodded. "She's safe. She sent me to find you." Audrey's eyes filled with tears. But before she could respond, the unmistakable sound of footsteps thundered overhead. Many footsteps. The entire building seemed to shake with them. "Move!" Tobias shouted, but it was already too late. The door at the top of the stairs burst open, and Jackson Vale descended with at least 15 men at his back. He was exactly as the photographs showed, sharp-featured, expensive suit, and the cruel smile of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "Well, well," Vale said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Daemon Choi, didn't expect to see you playing hero tonight. What's the matter? Running out of whores in Koreatown?" Daemon's team raised their weapons, but they were badly outnumbered. Vale's men fanned out, blocking every exit. The women behind Daemon whimpered in fear. Vale's smile widened. "You walked into my house, subdued my people, and thought you'd just walk out? I don't know what this bitch offered you, but—" "She didn't offer me anything," Daemon said, his voice cutting through Vale's smugness like a blade. His hand moved, not to his gun, but to his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small USB drive and held it up. "But she did leave me something interesting." Vale's smile faltered. "What is that?" "Everything. Financial records, trafficking routes, photographs, testimony. 27 pages of documentation that proves your entire operation." Daemon's voice was ice. "June uploaded it to the FBI's tip line about 30 minutes ago, also sent copies to the Los Angeles Times, the FBI's Los Angeles field office, and 3 federal prosecutors." The color drained from Vale's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Daemon tilted his head, listening. In the distance, barely audible but growing louder, came the wail of sirens. "You have two choices, Vale. Run now, and maybe survive long enough to make it out of the country, or stay here and face what's coming." Vale's hand moved to his weapon, but the certainty in his eyes had crumbled. His men looked at each other, the first seeds of doubt spreading through their ranks. "This is over," Daemon said coldly. "Your operation is finished. Your organization is done, and these women are leaving with me." The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began to flash through the broken windows above. Vale's bravado shattered completely. He turned and ran, his men scattering after him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Daemon moved immediately, organizing his team to help the women toward the exit. Audrey stumbled, and he caught her arm, steadying her. "My daughter," she gasped. "Is she really—" "Waiting for you," Daemon promised, "and she's going to be so happy to see you." As they emerged into the dawn, federal vehicles surrounded the building. Daemon melted into the shadows with his team, leaving the women to be found by the authorities. But not before meeting Audrey's eyes one last time. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Daemon nodded once, touched the pocket where Lily's drawing rested, and disappeared into the breaking day. 8 months transformed Los Angeles in ways both visible and invisible. The Iron Dragon's trafficking ring had been dismantled piece by piece, each arrest making headlines that Daemon read with quiet satisfaction. Jackson Vale was serving 40 years in federal prison, his appeals denied, his empire reduced to cautionary tales whispered in courtrooms. The 12 women rescued that night had been given support, counseling, and protection, some through official channels, others through carefully anonymous donations that could never be traced back to a certain Korean-American businessman. The biggest headlines, however, belonged to Audrey Clarke. The social worker who had dared to document a trafficking operation had become a prominent voice for victims' rights. She testified before Congress, consulted on new legislation, and founded a nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors. Her face appeared on news programs and in magazines, always composed, always fierce, always fighting. What the cameras didn't show were the nightmares that still woke her some nights, or the way her hands sometimes shook when she passed white vans on the street. But she was healing. They both were. Every Sunday at 3 p.m., Daemon's Mercedes pulled up outside a modest apartment building in Silver Lake, a safe neighborhood with good schools and neighbors who looked out for each other. Mrs. Song always drove, and she always smiled when Lily came running out before Daemon could even reach the door. "Uncle Day!" The 7-year-old launched herself at him with the absolute trust of a child who had never been given reason to fear him. Daemon caught her easily, lifting her up as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Hello, little one. What did you make this week?" Lily's artwork had progressed significantly. The crayon stick figures had given way to more detailed drawings, her school, her friends, her mother at her nonprofit office. Today she dragged him inside to show him a watercolor painting of a dragon and a small girl sitting together under a tree. "That's you," she pointed at the dragon, "because of your tattoo. And that's me. We're having a picnic." Daemon studied the painting, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest. "It's beautiful. May I keep it?" Lily beamed. "I made it for you." Audrey emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray with tea and Lily's favorite cookies. The bruises had long since faded, replaced by a quiet strength that Daemon recognized, the kind that came from surviving something that should have broken you. "You're spoiling her," Audrey said, but her smile was genuine as she poured the tea. "Someone should," Daemon replied, accepting the cup. They fell into their usual rhythm, talking about Lily's school performance, Audrey's latest advocacy work, the small details of ordinary life that Daemon had never experienced before. He'd quietly funded Audrey's nonprofit through several shell corporations and ensured that she and Lily had protection they'd never see but would always have. As the sun began to set, painting the Los Angeles sky in shades of orange and gold, Lily climbed into Daemon's lap with a serious expression that reminded him painfully of Mina. "Uncle Day," she said softly, "did you ever find your sister? The one who was taken?" The question shouldn't have surprised him. Lily was bright and remembered everything, but it still caught him off guard. Audrey's hand paused on her teacup, her eyes meeting his with understanding. Daemon shook his head slowly. "No, I never found her." Lily was quiet for a moment, her small hand reaching out to take his larger one. When she spoke, her voice carried a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Maybe Minna sent me to you," she said simply, "so you could save my mama, so you wouldn't be sad anymore." The words hit Daemon like a physical blow. He stared down at this child who had stumbled into his life 8 months ago, desperate and terrified, and somehow changed everything. She hadn't just given him a chance to save her mother, she'd given him something he thought he'd lost forever: purpose, connection, redemption. "You know what?" Daemon said, his voice rougher than usual. "I think you might be right." Lily hugged him fiercely, and over her head, Daemon met Audrey's eyes. She was crying silently, understanding passing between them that needed no words. They were both broken people who had found each other through tragedy and somehow built something like family from the pieces. Daemon Choi had spent 20 years building walls around his heart, convinced that caring was weakness, that emotion was a liability, that the best way to honor Minna's memory was to become untouchable. He'd been wrong about all of it. The little girl who ran to him weeping in a restaurant hadn't just asked him to save her mother. She'd offered him something far more valuable, the chance to save himself. As the sun disappeared below the Los Angeles skyline, Daemon held Lily close and let himself feel something he hadn't experienced in 2 decades. Hope. Not the desperate kind that demands answers, but the quiet kind that whispers maybe, despite everything, there's still light to be found in the darkness. The child's courage hadn't just rescued her mother, it had rescued a man who thought he was beyond redemption, proving that even the darkest soul can find its way home when someone is brave enough to take their hand and lead them there. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story of redemption moved you, if you believe that trafficking rings like the Iron Dragons must be stopped, that children like Lily deserve protection, and that even broken people deserve a second chance at redemption, show your support by hitting that subscribe button and dropping a like right now. Comment below where you're watching from and tell us, do you believe in second chances for those who fight for justice? Real supporters of hope over evil will engage. Let's build a community that stands against darkness and celebrates the courage it takes to choose redemption. I'll see you in the next story.